Hi folks, my name is Will O'Meara. I'm the Connecticut Field Agent with Land for Good, and I'm so glad you all could join us for this pre-recorded session of the Farmland Access and Transfer Conference. We're really excited to be here participating in this virtual format, and it's a little different than how we would usually do things, so please bear with me if I stumble a bit throughout this presentation. We are here today to talk about affording farmland. So I've got a presentation set up for you, and we've got a really wonderful guest who I'm excited for you all to hear from. So without further ado, we're going to get started. All right, so to center our session today, we want to acknowledge the history of colonialism and slavery that has enabled us to occupy the land that we now call Maine and New England. We meet today on unceded land, the indigenous homelands of the Wabanaki. I myself am calling from the lands of the Mohican, Paugussett, and Wappinger in what we now call Connecticut. If you're interested in learning more about the lands that you now occupy, we encourage you to visit that link at the bottom of this slide, native-land.ca. We also acknowledge that 99% of the land in the Northeast is now owned by white people, and that's not an accident. It's the direct result of colonial history and purposeful policies and practices that continue to perpetuate systemic racism today. Our dominant food and farming system and the institutions that govern them are steeped in the histories of racism, exploitation, and oppression, and they remain highly inequitable. We acknowledge that today we're speaking from our own experience and through learning from others, and we welcome other viewpoints that others see differently from our own. And we also recognize that farmers of color and farmers who don't fit into the stereotypes of what an American farmer is due to their age, gender, sexuality, or many other aspects may face additional challenges that aren't necessarily addressed here. At Land for Good and Maine Farmland Trust, we're taking steps with our staff, board, and those we serve to learn more, listen to additional voices, and be an ally to Black, Indigenous, and persons of color. We feel that making space to acknowledge historical actions and current inequalities are really important. We look forward to continuing this discussion and hard work together so that we can achieve a more just and equitable future regardless of race, class, privilege, identity, and more. If you're interested in reading some more on this topic, I highly recommend the article in The Atlantic, The Great Land Robbery, which you can see on your left. It was extremely illuminating for me in understanding the depth and complexities of land loss and land ownership in the United States. Before we dive into the meat of the presentation regarding affording farmland, there are just a few definitions that I want to go over. First and foremost being access. So when we talk about farmland access, what are we talking about? Access in general just means the ability to enter a place, but in the context of agriculture, we're really talking about land tenure. So the ability to not only enter, but also securely hold the land to farm and conduct all the activities associated with a farming enterprise. We're also going to talk a lot about capital, which we would define as the wealth in form of money or other assets owned by a person or organization or available or contributed to them for a particular purpose, such as starting a company or farm, investing, etc. I should also note that this workshop is primarily targeted towards those conducting commercial farming, which we would define as growing crops or raising livestock for the purpose of making a profit rather than subsistence or some other primary aim, such as education, community enrichment, etc. That's not to say that those not engaged in commercial farming won't learn something from this, but that is our primary audience. And then finally, I want to touch on that word tenure. Tenure means to hold, holding the rights to farm on a piece of land and how those rights are allocated, used, and transferred. And so that's going to come up again and again as we talk about different methods of accessing farmland, whether that's a lease, ownership, or some of the other models that we'll discuss. So why affording farmland? Why isn't this just a presentation on farmland access? From my point of view, many farmers have the skills, experience, and motivation they need to successfully run a farm operation. Many of us have farmed for years under the employment of another farmer, gone to countless classes, read countless books on the business of farming and the ways that we know we need to get it done. But at the end of the day, all of those skills are sometimes hard to put to use if you don't have access to a piece of land. And especially now in the COVID pandemic, real estate is really unpredictable and not often in tune with the needs of farmers. So in my personal case, that's me and my partner Jill in the photo on the right there. And we started our farm earlier this year, Hungry Reaper Farm. We're a 1.5 acre vegetable farm in Morris, Connecticut. And we were farming on leased land. And the lease that we found allowed us to get on this land affordably. And so that was kind of the primary driver for starting our business this year. But with the COVID pandemic and with real estate booming in our particular area of the country, the landowners were essentially forced to sell for a number of reasons that I will leave out of this particular conversation. And so as we looked ahead to next season and future years, we are really hoping for some kind of land tenure that provides us with access to land that is both secure and affordable. We've proven that we have the ability to run a successful business, though there's plenty of room for improvement. But that long-term piece of it is what remains to be a challenge. And so without a whole lot of access to financial capital, the question remains, what can we do? And so I'm really excited that we are not the only people thinking about how to improve land access and affordability for farmers in New England and throughout the country. Luckily, there are a lot of really brilliant folks spending their time working on these issues. And so the next portion of this presentation is going to discuss several models and tools that folks may be interested in utilizing in order to address that issue of affordability. All right. Maybe we can pause the recording for a moment. All right, thank you everyone for accommodating that pause as we got our technology in order. I'm now joined by Beneth Phillips, the Director of Farmer Services with Dirt Capital Partners. Dirt Capital Partners invests in farmland in partnership with farmers throughout the Northeast, and they promote sustainable farmers' land access and security. They were part of a team that allowed Eli and Valerie of Honeyfield Farm in Norwich, Vermont to achieve secure land tenure. And Valerie will be joining us for the live panel that will accompany this presentation for the Maine Farmland Access and Transfer Conference. So I'm so glad Beneth could be here to talk about what Dirt Capital Partners does today. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Beneth to introduce herself and tell us a bit about what they do.
Great. Hi, Will. Thank you. So I'm Beneth Phelps. Thanks again for having Dirt Capital as part of this. My role with Dirt Capital Partners is Director of Farmer Services, And I came to Dirt Capital in 2016 from 5 years working at the Carrot Project, providing financial technical assistance and financing packaging to farm and food businesses in the Northeast. And at Dirt Capital, I assist farmers in evaluating their farm purchase options, making adequate financial plans, and working with them on moves or expansions.
Fantastic.
So I'm gonna share some slides, Will.
Great.
Is that showing for you?
Yeah.
Great. So Dirt Capital currently works with 25 farmers and has over $16 million invested in New England, New York, and New Jersey. We are actively making new investments and fielding inquiries from farmers across the US. About half the farmers we work with are first-generation farmers, and half are multi-generation farms. 11 of them are wholesale dairies shipping fluid milk to buyers like Organic Valley and Maple Hill Creamery, and 12 of them are diversified businesses selling things like vegetables, meat, cheese, and value-added products direct to consumers or through local and regional market channels. And 2 of them produce organic grains. Dirt Capital Partners, we consider ourselves a technical partner for farmers around land access and transition, and we aim to support sustainable farmers with viable business models to expand through increasing their land base and thereby bringing more land under long-term sustainable management. These goals are also dictated by the source of our funds, mostly individuals and family offices who want a portion of their investment funds to support sustainable land management and thriving, viable rural economies. We aim to take moderate risk to achieve these goals and utilize multidimensional underwriting, broad sector expertise, partnerships, and wraparound services to mitigate risk in each of our projects. And the goal of every single project is to transfer the farm to the farmer over a 5 to 10 year period while providing secure land access to the farmer. Dirt Capital Partners has a number of goals, one of which is farmland access and affordability. And we work to fill gaps in the financing space through affordable, highly flexible, and secure lease arrangements. We're not looking to be duplicative of other financing options. We're specifically problem solving around gaps, be it barriers to entry for younger farmers or transitioning solutions for exiting farmers. A second objective of Dirt Capital is land conservation. We actively look to partner with land trusts. We are a very willing seller of conservation easements, and we can close simultaneously with a conservation easement sale or act as a pre-conservation buyer when we are actively working with a land trust, but the easement funds will not come through for a few years. A third objective of Dirt Capital is farm viability. Dirt Capital supports farmers with viable business models and seeks to do so in geographies where appropriate farmland is or can be made affordable for those business models and where comprehensive coordinated technical assistance services are available to farmers, including on business management and production. We use coordinated wraparound services and staff expertise to help farmers maintain viability and extend their resource base in smart ways. With Dirt Capital's participation, we allow them to grow their operations profitably through an expanded resource base. I'll just share some of our current project criteria. Upon receiving an application from a farmer, we work closely with the applicant to review their operating history, their projections, and then we discuss their goals. We discuss what lease terms best fit the farmer's personal goals and financial capabilities. We provide support as needed on their land search, due diligence, legal work, and negotiating the terms. We also work closely with existing resources such as university extension programs, farm viability programs, land trusts, experienced farm mentors, and others to support our due diligence and ensure the farmer's business plans are realistic and achievable, and to provide ongoing support and assistance to the farmer. I'll share a little bit of our perspective on the case study that you all are hearing about with Eli and Valerie from Honeyfield Farm. I had worked with Eli previously at the Carrot Project. He was a client of mine and had gotten a startup loan in his pre-revenue first year as a farmer at Shadow Creek. And so he'd stayed in touch with me all along and successfully paid off that loan and built a relationship with me as a lender. And so he and Valerie told me that they always knew they wanted to buy a farm with dirt capital. And so they stayed in touch and looked at a number of farms with me, and this one turned out to be the best fit eventually for them. And some of the strengths of their plan were they had extensive experience and transferable markets to their new location, and they'd been testing out their business by leasing a smaller property from their employers for 5 seasons, and they'd honed their business plan over those 5 years, and they had saved cash. A little bit about the sellers that made the transaction work for Dirt Capital. From our perspectives, they had a long track record. They were in business for 30 years. They were certified organic. The land and soil were quality. They had good support from a number of organizations, including Land for Good historically. And they had made the move to list the farm on the Farmland Finder. And they were willing and able to keep the business operations intact and going until they found the right buyers to transfer the business to. And the business transfer included some ongoing operations. So Dirt Capital was able to purchase the farm on behalf of Eli and Valerie in October of 2019. And then we simultaneously signed a lease with an option to purchase with Eli and Valerie at that same time. That gives them the option to purchase in 5 years, and then again at the end of the lease in 9 years. Here's some of the overall transactional details of the transaction with Eli and Valerie. The overall transaction cost was around $700,000, part of which was the purchase price with Dirt Capital, and some of which were the other needed items that they needed to operate the business. Dirt Capital views leasing as a very important step for farmers. In this case, you'll see that Eli and Valerie had 2 leases before they actually planned to purchase their farm and own the land underneath their operation. So even though they own their business at this point, they first had a smaller lease and now they've moved on to a much larger lease. And we think leasing is a very important step because it allows you to build markets like Eli and Valerie did, build equity, develop a track record, and understand what property will suit your long-term operation best. About 40% of farmland nationally is leased according to the Ag Census, and the cost of leasing can sometimes be 50% of the cost of owning. A lot of first-generation farmers do not start out by purchasing land, nor do they have equity markets or the financial track record to justify it. However, if they lease for too long, that can be difficult to plan for growth. So around the time that Eli and Valerie did, at the 5-year mark, after having 5 years of their Schedule Fs, is a good time to look at purchasing a home base or an operation, and then they're continuing to lease existing fields beyond that they took over from the sellers as well. And so now they can make improvements and plan for the future under the lease with Dirt Capital and treat it like it's the property they're going to be on forever. Thanks, Will.
Thank you so much, Benneth. That was a really wonderful explanation of kind of how your model fits into the larger topic of affording farmland. And I'm just wondering if folks are interested in learning more or would like to get in touch with you about acquiring farmland of their own, what would be the best way to do that?
Mm-hmm. So they're always can reach out to me directly at Dirt Capital. We do also have an inquiry form on our website that farmers can fill out. It's not an application. It's just simply you can give your contact information and a little bit about what you're looking to achieve in your land purchase. If you have a property in mind, or you can tell us a little bit about your current operations, you can fill out that form, and that form comes directly to me, and then I can follow up with you directly. We also have a lot of case studies on our website and reports where we talk about our past work. So if you're looking at want to learn more about the diversity of projects that we do, because there are a lot of other types of models and things that we can achieve beyond just this one example we've given today, you can read through some of those or approach us for a phone call. And I'll also suggest the Finding Farmland series that National Young Farmers Coalition has. I have some content in there that I would also recommend to participants that looks at how to buy farmland and some of the things that you need to do to prepare, and also some of my thoughts about looking at a property and evaluating it. So there's a blog post and an interview that I'd also recommend for people.
Fantastic. If anyone watching this presentation would like those resources directly, my email address will be at the end of this presentation, and you can ask for them after you've watched.
Great. Thanks,
Thank you
Will.
so much, Benneth. Talk to
Great.
you soon.
Okay, bye.
All right. With that, we will jump back into our presentation. So the next model for affording farmland that I wanted to touch on is the community land trust. And we're really lucky that, again, for the live panel that accompanies this presentation, we'll have Ethan Miller of Land in Common joining that discussion. And I wanted to address this because through my inquiries that I received for Land for Good and some of the conversations that I have been a part of in recent years, collective or collaborative access of land is something that folks are increasingly interested in. And the Community Land Trust is one way for folks to do that. So this graphic here comes from Land in Commons model in particular. And so what you'll see is that Wild Mountain Cooperative, the kind of business at the center of Land in Common, formed a community land trust, a 501c3 nonprofit organization, which allowed them to raise money to purchase a piece of farmland. And fundraising is often a really key part of the initial farmland acquisition. A lot of you in the state of Maine probably saw the fundraiser going around for the Little Juba farm for the Somali Bantu community organization. And so that access to capital from the community might allow you to raise funds that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise as a private business. And so then once the land is acquired, that 501c3 then grants 99-year rolling ground leases to one or several farmers for that piece of land. And you might be wondering what a ground lease is, because it's not something that's in kind of everyday conversations around land access. So the ground lease means that the land trust owns the land that is being farmed, but the stewards of the land, the members of the community land trust, own any improvements that they make to that property. So if there's a hay farmer, as an example, on that community land trust, and they need to build a hay loft for storing their bales, then they would own that building. And if they wished to exit that lease agreement, then they would be able to sell it at a fair value to the next possible tenant who wishes to continue that operation. So what's great about this model is that the farmers are not required to come up with the financial capital necessary to purchase the land. However, they can build up their business and invest in infrastructure and other improvements that will allow them to build equity and give them some value in the future should they decide to cease their farming operations. And this model really values the kind of permanence of that farmland and emphasizes the transfer of these common assets within a community at a fair value rather than maximizing profits either of the land or those infrastructure improvements. So I really encourage you to tune into the live panel so that Ethan can share more about his experience in the Community Land Trust at Land in Common. And if you would like more resources on this topic, like I said, my email will be available at the end of this presentation. So another tool that Benneth mentioned in the Dirt Capital Partners model and may also apply to the Community Land Trust model is something called a conservation easement. And so what a conservation easement does is it removes the development rights from a piece of land. So if you consider land ownership as a whole bundle of rights, so sorry. Sorry for the interruption there, folks. This is live. So anyway, as I was saying, if you consider land ownership as a bundle of rights, the things that you are allowed to do as the owner of the land, development would be one of those rights. And so in order to ensure that the land can be farmed forever, one can either sell or donate those development rights to a land trust, a state Department of Agriculture, or any other organization that's authorized to hold the conservation easement. So those rights are often paid for by the state or land trust, or they can be donated for sometimes a fairly significant tax benefit. There may be other restrictions that come along with that conservation easement in terms of how the land can be used, any conservation practices that may or may not be required, as well as the construction of farm buildings. As Beneth mentioned as well, these can often be added at the closing of the sale of a property in order to lower that cost of the purchase in addition to other sources of financing. And finally, a conservation easement may be combined in certain states. In New England, I believe Maine, Massachusetts, and Vermont are the only states where this is authorized currently. The conservation easement may be combined with the option to purchase at ag value. So this is another restriction that would be added onto the conservation easement, which should further increase affordability and would be additional money paid out to the initial farmland owner at the time of the easement. All right. So at this point, I want to move on to some tools and resources that can be used to kind of better understand what your options are in terms of affording farmland, and to look at these models that we've already discussed in the larger scheme of farmland access strategies. And those tools are Acquiring Your Farm, an online resource from Land for Good, the Farmland Access Methods Guide, also from Land for Good, the Finding Farmland Calculator from the National Young Farmer Coalition, and the Farm Service Agency Guidebook, also from the National Young Farmers Coalition. So Acquiring Your Farm is an online resource, and we are considering producing a printed or other version of this resource. Please reach out to us if you need this information in an alternative format other than online. We always welcome feedback as to how to improve the resources that we put out there and how they can be more accessible or helpful for those farmers that we serve. So the online tool includes these 7 modules: Farmland Tenure Basics, Financial Assessment, Owning Farmland, Finding Farmland, Leasing Farmland, Communication and Negotiation, and Community Partners. And each of these modules are really interactive and provide a lot of definitions and further reading for any particular area that you feel you are struggling with. In this particular presentation, we're going to focus in on the financial assessment. So the reason that we focus in on the financial assessment is that understanding your personal finances is a crucial first step in understanding what farmland and what access methods may or may not be affordable for you. And timing and education are the most crucial factors because, as I'm sure you know, our financial positions change over time, and something that we can't imagine being affordable today may become affordable several years in the future, like we heard about Valerie and Eli leasing for 5 years prior to finding a potential permanent home for their farm. And education as well, in that if you don't know what options are available to you in the first place, then you can't possibly begin to access them. So taking a lot of time in the front end to educate yourself on the financing and access models that are out there is really crucial. It's also important to create a business plan that meets your personal financial needs. In other words, to build your business in order to support you, and not for you to serve your business. And then finally, to consider scenarios that might reduce the cost of accessing farmland. So one tool that's in this financial assessment that I absolutely love is this family living budget from the Vermont Farm Viability Enhancement Program. And this is part of a larger coordinated financial statement. So the spreadsheet has pages and pages that apply to other aspects of your business. But as a first step, I really recommend that folks go through this family living budget and really comb through your expenses and your habits from a whole year and plug them into this spreadsheet to get a really clear picture of what money's coming in and where money goes out. My partner and I did this prior to starting our farm, and it gave us a really clear understanding of how much money we would need to make in order to both afford to lease our land and lease our apartment and everything like that, but also how much we would need to make in order to sustain our current lifestyle. And so going through this spreadsheet will hopefully give a really clear picture on where you stand in relation to your financial capital. But I do want to stress that if the results of this sort of exercise don't play out in a way that is totally favorable or hopeful to you, there is a bigger frame in which we should be considering the idea of capital. And that is the 8 forms of capital. And this comes from a book of the same title by Gregory Landau and Ethan Rowland, and came to me through my colleague, Abby Sadowskis, our main field agent. And it's been a really wonderful framework for me to kind of consider our farm and how we've been able to access our land. And so the idea here is that all of us have a certain level of wealth in areas outside of just our financial wealth. And so I'm going to use our own farm and our land access story as sort of an example to go through these different forms. So first off, for us, social capital was probably the most important. And what social capital refers to is our relationship with fellow people. And so when we were starting our land search, the first place that we looked was to our friends and our family. And the place that ended up working out was to create a sublease from some livestock farmer friends of ours who we had helped process turkeys for Thanksgiving, move fencing. We'd been there quite a bit over the years as friends and also as kind of collaborators and helpers on the farm when those big tasks came up. And so all those favors that we had done and the relationship that we had developed, we were able to leverage into having access to an unused corner of the farm to start our vegetable operation. So material capital, we didn't have too much, but we did have a lot of odds and ends farm tools and equipment that we had sort of scavenged and picked up over the years, kind of assuming that they might be useful. And so any physical objects you have that might aid in your operation is encompassed in your material capital. The next piece is intellectual capital, and this is simply what you know. And so in our case, we had both spent a collective 15 years working on various farms, and we'd learned quite a bit. And this also includes any reading that you've done, whether it's on business in general, farming, understanding land and soil science and things like this. That all encompasses your intellectual capital and influences your ability to succeed once you've begun your operation. And this is intimately connected with experiential capital. A lot of that intellectual capital we gained came from our experience working on other farms and, talking with other farmers and trying to expand our breadth of experience as much as possible before we dove in on our own and started the farm. The next piece is cultural capital, and I would say this is intimately linked with social capital. We're really fortunate to be part of a robust network of young farmers, conservation-minded farmers, farmers who are really looking towards food justice and adequate stewardship of our natural resources. And so being part of that network has allowed us to, for one, be in touch with the farmers that we accessed our land from, and then also to gain more intellectual capital and experiential capital when we need to look to our other farmers for advice or to borrow equipment, et cetera. And cultural capital may also include, if you're from a community which has strong food traditions or ritual associated with the stewardship of land or agriculture. So it's a fairly broad category. The next piece would be living capital. In our case, we're vegetable growers. So once we got onto land and started those first seedlings in our secondhand hoop house that we had scavenged as a bit of material capital, those seedlings became our very first living capital. And so we were able to start a CSA with the promise that that living capital would turn into a return for our CSA members who ultimately invested their financial capital in the farm. Spiritual capital is one that's a bit harder to define, and it may or may not influence you as an individual depending on what your kind of worldview and spiritual practices are. But one way to think about this is kind of in the idea of karma, that what you put out into the world is in a way what comes back to you. And so again, it's harder to define. I'm not too sure how it had an impact on our farm in particular, but it's certainly another way to consider this. And this concept is somewhat abstract, but the point is really to understand that we all bring a lot more to the table than just how much money is in our bank account. And so in addition to that financial assessment, I would encourage you to sit down and consider these 8 different categories and what kind of assets and resources you might be able to bring to the table. Just thinking about social capital again, putting your story out into the world and into your networks may yield a land opportunity that you could have never imagined. When we lost our lease or found out we were going to lose our lease in July of this year, we started mentioning it offhand to everyone we knew. And it ended up being that a restaurant account that we had been selling our produce to was the connection for the land that we're going to move to this winter. So really to consider all these relationships that you have and how the different forms of capital relate to one another can start to open doors that may not appear if you're just thinking about capital in terms of how much money you have. All right, so now that we've looked at kind of viewing our own personal finances, we've looked at some different models of how farmland can be made more affordable. We're going to look at the Farm Access Methods Guide from Land for Good. And this guide defines farmland access in 3 basic categories, and those are ownership now, ownership in the future, and no ownership. And so one key feature is this decision tool. So each of those categories is further broken down into what some of those land access methods might look like. So for example, under ownership now, partial ownership interests. We have the ground lease, which is what we mentioned before with the community land trust. And so the farmer has certain rights and the community land trust retains other rights. We look at ownership in the future and we see lease to own with that right of first refusal, and that relates to what Dirt Capital presented, in that the farmer leases for a period of 10 years approximately, and at the 5th year and the 9th year has the option to purchase the farm. And so, if you think about what your values are, if ownership is really important to you, then the ownership now or ownership in the future categories might be where you focus your time. If ownership is not necessarily important to you, or partial ownership is interesting to you, then something in the no ownership or partial ownership category may be more appealing. So here again is that bundle of sticks, a bundle of rights analogy that I made earlier. So in the case of fee simple ownership, the farmer holds all of those rights. If you were to place a conservation easement, you might be moving down into that whole shared ownership where the land trust or some other entity holds the development rights and you retain the rest of them. Sorry, that would be a partial ownership category. Whole shared ownership might be more like that community land trust where you and other farmers are co-holding those interests together. So this is just a useful analogy to think about kind of where the farmer stands in relation to whatever tenure method they choose to pursue. So those 3 categories of ownership now, ownership in the future, and no ownership are assessed against these 6 variables: security, equity, affordability, flexibility, farming requirements, and access to capital. So again, we'll hone in on those affordability and access to capital pieces. It's important to note that affordability is not the same as something being inexpensive. So in the example that Benneth gave earlier, she said that the total cost of that transaction ended up being about $700,000. Now it's relatively unlikely that the farmers in that case could have made a complete down payment and paid a mortgage on that amount of money. But what the method that they chose did was increase the affordability while the cost remained the same. And they did that through postponing the purchase and leasing while they built up their business. So there's generally 3 methods that are used to make farms more affordable. And those are to decrease the cost of purchasing, postponing the purchase, or leasing land instead. And we'll get into some examples of each of those in the next slide. And again, it's important to distinguish between the price of the property and the cost. We'll see this again later on when we look at the Finding Farmland calculator from the National Young Farmer Coalition. But the price of the property does not reflect the full cost of that method of land tenure over the life of the farm. So in order to decrease the cost of purchasing, one tool that we talked about was the agricultural conservation easement. Now, the idea behind these is that with the development rights purchase, the property has kind of a ceiling that it can reach in terms of the value. So if it's working well, ideally, the future generations will be able to pay a price that is closer to the agricultural value. That being said, this doesn't occur in all cases, especially without that option to purchase at ag value placed on the easement. There are cases in which protected agricultural lands sell for a lot of money, particularly if the house or view or location are desirable for, kind of an estate type of use rather than agricultural use. Seller financing or lease to own is another way to decrease the cost of purchasing. In some cases, lease to own can be used to, pay towards a down payment on a property. And In other cases, it is just for what's called a right of first refusal. If the property is being put up for sale, then the farmer has the right to make an offer first, essentially. Seller financing may eliminate some of the fees and interest associated with a mortgage through a traditional lender or a farm lender. And then, of course, purchasing with others. If you can gather a community together to purchase a piece of property, then you'll be bringing all of that financial capital to the table rather than just yours as an individual or as one singular business. You can also postpone your purchase, which gives you an opportunity to increase your farm revenue or your savings that you build up over time. It also gives you time to revisit that financial assessment and see if there are tweaks that you can make to your business plan or your family living budget that might increase your financial capital to purchase a piece of property. And then, of course, you can lease land instead. And so for some folks, that value of ownership is really important, that in the long run, they know that this will be their property to do with as they please. But for other folks, leasing land is just, perfectly acceptable, and they can operate their business in a sustainable way while not owning the land. And now somewhere in between on this is that ground lease, which we talked about. And this is kind of a way to maximize the amount of equity that you're building without purchasing a property outright. So the next tool we're going to discuss is this Finding Farmland calculator from the National Young Farmer Coalition. And this is a really wonderful tool. We're going to watch a short tutorial on it shortly. But this allows you to create an infinite number of scenarios to kind of build a farmland purchase. And now, I did say purchase. This tool does not really apply to folks who are considering a lease or some other form of farmland access. It really applies to the purchase exclusively. But what it allows you to do is, put in how much you might be able to afford in a down payment, put in what you think you could qualify for in a mortgage or a loan from the FSA, and even put in tools like a conservation easement or lease to own in order to bring that cost down. And here again is where I talked about distinguishing from the price versus the cost. So in this first slide, you will see that the total, if you tallied up these four boxes on the left-hand side of this picture here, then you'll see that the total purchasing price of this farm would be about $300,000. However, when you go to the next slide, you'll see that the total cost of this method of purchasing over the lifetime of the loans used is actually $497,409. And so understanding that nuance and how much things will actually cost you over the length of your farmland tenure is an important thing to consider when you're making a plan for your business and your preferred method of accessing land. So with that, I'm going to pull up a short video for you to see this tool in action. And I'd highly encourage you to check out the Finding Farmland series on the National Young Farmer Coalition website, which Benneth from Dirt Capital Partners contributed to as well.
In this video, I'll show you how to use the calculator's financing scenario builder. To start, on the landing page, all you do is enter a property price. Remember, that's in the top toolbar here in case you want to change it, and you can name your scenario anything you want. Probably the most straightforward financing scenario is a bank mortgage. So for that, you're just going to add a regular old loan. And the first thing you do when you add that loan, or the first thing you'll notice, might be this warning here. It's just telling you that with most bank loans, you're going to need a down payment, some kind of cash down payment. So if you open this up, it takes away that warning. And you you could either enter your down payment as a cash total or a percentage, and that's a percentage of the property price. So say you need a 20% down payment, that'll calculate that $40,000 for you. So back to the loan box here, there's a lot of different options you can have because there's a lot of different types of loans out there, a lot of ways that you can negotiate with the lender to change your terms. But the most simple would just be to mortgage the rest of the property price at a flat 4.5% interest rate, which you could just change here. Say you've got a 4% rate over a 30-year term. So here, if you scroll down, you'll see that the calculator is also warning you that usually there are closing costs associated with purchasing property. We'll just enter a term there. It's also usually property taxes and property insurance. That's usually built into your loan. So if you scroll down, the calculator will give you the results of that financing scenario. It'll tell you how much you'd be paying over the amortization period. And remember, we had a 30-year amortization. And it breaks that down between the taxes you pay, the interest you pay, and the principal you pay, your original down payment, and also your insurance payments. And this other chart is showing you what your monthly payment would be over the course of that amortization period, again, 30 years, and what each of those monthly payments consist of. So now, again, this is a pretty simple scenario. And so the payments don't change over time. But you could have something a lot more complicated.
All right. So as you said, things can get a lot more complicated. If you need assistance looking at that tool, there are a lot more videos on how to and some of those complexities that may or may not apply to your farm situation. And of course, Land for Good can be a great resource in using and understanding these various tools that are out there as well. Another great place to look when you're looking at that calculator and you're thinking, is an FSA loan right for me, and how could I use this to purchase my farm, is this FSA loan guidebook from the National Young Farmers Coalition. And so what I love about this guide is that it introduces farm service agency loans in a really easily digestible format that is clear and concise and written from the point of view of a farmer who went through the process herself. And so it details all types of loan types that they offer, everything from conservation loans to operating loans, and of course ownership loans, that is to purchase the land and farm that you might have your eyes set on. And it also details the qualifications necessary to be able to access those loans, what the application process looks like, and then of course several case studies of farmers who have gone through the process themselves. And the other thing that's really great about this guide is that it allows you to kind of slowly prepare on your own time as you put together all the materials you might need to apply for a loan without the sort of added pressure and power dynamic of speaking with the loan officer directly. So you can march into that FSA office or most likely a phone call or Zoom chat these days without the added pressure of that face-to-face interaction with the person who may ultimately approve or deny your loan. So this resource is available for free online. If you have trouble finding it or accessing it, please shoot me an email and I'd be happy to get it to you and walk through it if you're in need. So these are some of the resources that I've mentioned throughout the presentation. Again, if you send me an email, I'd be happy to get all of these links to you rather than trying to copy them all down, as well as any of the other resources that I've mentioned throughout the presentation. I can be reached at will@landforgood.org. Again, my name is Will Amira. I'm the Connecticut Field Agent, but I would be happy to answer any questions that you have, regardless of the state or region that you live in. And I really encourage you to tune into our accompanying live panel at the Maine Farmland and Transfer and Access Conference, November 16th through 18th, as well as all of the wonderful programming that the Maine Farmland Trust and Land for Good have lined up. Thank you so much for tuning into this presentation, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you need a bit of assistance. Thank you so much.